can everyone hear me? Okay, you've got the headphones, so that's good. Okay, thanks to everyone for still being here. You're very brave to still be here in this sun. It's very nice to still see friends. In this last session, I want to briefly explain what we are going to do. I'm here with Hazi Patel, who is a very good friend, old comrade, and an exceptional superstar academic when it comes to food and social justice struggles. And I say superstar in the sense not that he's just an extremely good academic, which he is, but he's also one of the very few people who don't just stay in academia and write their excellent papers, but he's also in the world of the movements in the real life. And I think this is extremely important, and it's the reason why it's so nice to have Raz with us today, all the way from Texas in the United States. So, sorry. Okay, do you want me to speak further away, maybe? Here?
Yes, that's good. A little bit to the left, you don't have to go farther away, just go a little bit to the left. Yeah. But then you'll be in the sun or
Maybe you can sit here so whoever doesn't speak as a... Yeah. Okay, so hopefully it works. I think it works better. Okay, so I think it's extremely important. I'm very excited to hear what Raz has to say today, so I'll try to keep what I wanted to discuss short. But just to explain to you why the text that you're going to hear now is quite general about the life in the favela, and someone, as a complete outsider like myself, understands it. So of course you can understand I'm also quite nervous because this is someone coming from outside telling you how you live your life. It doesn't make much sense. But to give you the context, if this project, the NutriCities project, NutriCidades, if it is going to form into a book, something based on this text could be the basis of an introduction, maybe. So it's someone who knows very little about favela life, telling other people who know even less about favela life what the main characteristics are here. So this is to say, excuse me if you think this is some very simple reading. So I'll read this through. It would be good to get your thoughts, hopefully not too harsh. And then we can move on with Raj, who can reflect on some of his experiences in other places, in research and in work that he does with comrades in other places around the world, and also some thoughts that he has about the question of food and food access more broadly, right? So these two parts, so I'll start with this. So it starts with the way that I understand the favelas here in Rio. And in my understanding, the favelas in the city, they owe their existence to the city's very special geography, the very special morphology, with these great grand mountains that slide straight back down into the sea, and that made these hard-to-reach slopes of the mountains a safe haven for the city's newcomers, the people who always arrive, and keeping them safe from those who are away and below in the settled plains. Okay, but in the strangest of ways, I think, the favelas also here in Rio, they also own the continuing existence to time itself. It was soldiers who had won the Canudos War in Bahia in the 80s that first gave birth to the favela, the sense of the favela. Or more specifically, it was them arriving here and then just waiting. They were waiting along the hillsides that were overlooking the city for the government to hand them the money that was promised to them after this victorious war. This money never arrived and the soldiers never left. So in a way, the favela was born as a waiting place, and in some ways it still remains so. There is more generally, again as a complete outsider, I find very strange an obsession there seems to be with time in Brazil as a whole. This is, after all, the country of the future. And the current moment is always read as a precursor for the next episode that is always in the waiting. But this is in a sense not uncommon, it's actually common in many countries, but they not exactly belong to what would be called the developed world. The countries where the argument for development has been repeatedly built upon a narrative of the need to modernize things. And one of these countries is the country that we come from, Greece. And in the case of Greece, what is interesting, I think, is that the word that is used time and time again by politicians is slightly different. It's not modernizing, but it's exynchronismos, which means to bring up to speed, synchronize state of affairs. So to bring up to speed what's presumed to be a backward thing with something that's presumed to be advanced, which is, of course, presumed to be Northern European and the Anglophone world as a whole. This, of course, the reading of the periphery as backward, and this certainty, this ideology, that all it would take for development to successfully arrive would be this change of gear, as if you're driving and you just change your gear, you turn a page on a book, and you suddenly land in this new chapter. You move fast forward, away from the anomalies of the past, and coming to this perfectly functioning present. In a sense, I think there's no place that represents this faith into this in-between movement more than the favela. There is here an assumption of temporariness from all parts. Some of the people who live here, not everybody of course, they would dream of their stay as a passage to another place in the city. Local authorities would dream and had for quite some time assumed the favela was an urban form that was soon to be controlled and tamed, integrated into the city whole. And the police and the army, of course, coming in with their heavy weapons, as explained very nicely before by Christos, would always imagine that they can just come in and pacify, normalize, and again turn the favela into the image of the city proper. They all thought that this was a matter of time, but I think in a very interesting way the favela is also a matter over time. It's with every single moment when this integration doesn't happen, there's another layer of construction, of permanence, that seek to improve the daily conditions for this much longer. But the third way in which the favela relates to time is that it's a matter. Life here is a matter of time as a whole. It's a time that gets to go places, to reach the city proper, the time it takes to sort out your daily tasks, the time it takes to find a job, the long time it finds to get a job, usually much shorter time it takes to lose it. So what differentiates the Rio favela and the informal parts of city as a whole is not just the attitude, it's not the urban form, but I think all the infrastructure, it's none of these alone. I think it's also time and the effort it takes to reach the rest of the city as a whole. Okay. So I think that the lack of hardly any formal infrastructure, at least to begin with, that would facilitate access to the favela hilltops meant that here, the higher you were geographically, the lower you were in your social or economic terms. And I think what's very also interesting is that if you swap now the tropical mountain mass for the sunlit concrete of the buildings that we have in Greece, in the southern Mediterranean, I think you can see a very striking similarity there. And the similarity is that the buildings, there's blocks of flats that exist in Athens and other big cities, and they were built after the war and mostly in the 60s and the 70s with the Greek dictatorship. And what happened there initially is because there was no lift, there was no elevator, the higher up you would go, the lower the classes. People who could not afford to live near the street, easy access, right, were forced up. It only took one technology to completely invert this, and of course this was the elevator. As soon as the elevator came, this was literally turned on its head, and the most affluent apartments found themselves overnight to be the ones at the very top of the building, because now they had equally easy access. You just go up in the lift, and of course you also have very good quality of air, you have peace, you have quiet, you're literally raised above the city. But otherwise I think it's a very similar idea, concept. In Greece it would be called a vertical segregation, and I think there is similarities to what's happening here. Of course, in Rio things are not so easy. An elevator couldn't change that much. It has been tried, I've seen, in some favelas, but I really can't compare to the change that we've seen with individual elevators in Greece. But again, this lack of access and the limited mobility becomes the very essence, I think, the state of being of the favela. It is what not only allowed it to become in the first place, but it's also what continues to allow for its existence, despite and against talk of and attempts at pacification, gentrification, or normalization in other in any other shape or form. Now I know there's a lot of academic, university writing out there on favela integration, favela pacification, or even the concept of a favela as a parallel state. In any case, favela as a solid state of being that might one day be that's outside the city proper, and that might be one day brought back in. Something that can somehow sometimes be quelled, that can be controlled, and can exist along and in parallel with the city, or become a part of it. But next to this, I think we need to also think of the favela as an outcome of a constant struggle over mobility and access, as an inadvertent and unwanted almost witness of this fight, this struggle over controlling who gets to move and who gets to stay. So this is not just abstractly and broadly a right to the city, but it's a right of getting in and around the city. And in this way, before we think about infrastructure and before we think about urban planning, I think what defines a favela is a question of access. Okay. So then more broadly, I think, trying to think of a kind of main forces that make the favela into being, I'm tempted, and again, I run a very high risk of oversimplifying things, and I know this, so please bear with me. I think there would be three main players, the way I think of them, in the favela formation. First, and most important, of course, they are the people who live in the favela themselves, the original inhabitants, the people who come here, who've been arriving since, who make their home here, even if they might try to find jobs elsewhere. Second are the authorities, but here I understand these much more broadly speaking, so it could be municipal or national authorities, the military or the police, also international NGOs with their soft power, and maybe prudent Western educated planners with sophisticated technical skills. These are all the three sides of what is a breathtakingly alive, an incredible hub, a vibrant community that celebrates life every day despite, or maybe because it's very fragile and precarious. But this is not all. These are two sides. And I think a third side, and this is something I want to think with you for a little bit, is something that comes in the form of the ideas that travel to and through the favela without actually being grounded here, without being favela specific. And again, I would like to go back to an example from my country, from Greece, to help you explain what I'm thinking about here. So when the far-right party, back then it was one of the very far-right, few far-right parties in Europe and in the world that did so well. Now, unfortunately, it's not an exception in many ways. So the Golden Dawn, this far-right party, when it jumped from 0.3 to 7% in the national elections of 2012, a lot of us, 6 years ago, a lot of us were very deeply shocked. And we were trying to understand what it was maybe locally, in cities, in towns, in villages, in parts of the country, what local factors could explain why these Nazis did so well in the elections, right? But to the people's disappointment, looking through different local geographical factors, there was nothing that would quite explain why the Golden Dawn did so well. Of course, there were some cities where they did better than others. There were some regions where they didn't quite score as well. Some others were, okay, they did better. But generally speaking, there were, what was extremely phenomenal about them was that they were extremely even geographically. That they scored even across the entire country and all of the cities. So we think, in a way, the lesson there would be that the factors that helped them were not geographical, right? So things like the media and institutions that exist across the country are the ones that helped and that played a role in this rise. We knew already there was a great number of police supporting the Golden Dawn, so police is one of the actors that exist across an entire country, right? We knew that the Orthodox Church, parts of the church, they also helped out, they gave them a massive boost. And in a way, I think, and this is more of a question and less of a certainty, is that maybe something similar can explain the rise of the far right, or the equal rise of the far right in the favela with other parts of the city. The question of the existence, especially of religious leaders that could help there, but also, I'm sorry I forgot this was another factor in Greece, was the media, which also helped promote the party and its cause in a way that was disproportionate to what was going on. A few years later, the President of the United States was popularized by calling fake news. I think we had very sad kind of like reality was that it was in a way it was invented in Greece, you know, a little bit like democracy, but much more deteriorated 2,000 years on. So this idea, you know, and the reason I refer to this is that the Golden Dawn saw a rise in many parts where there were no migrants, right? So you have a party that's campaigning on a ticket saying, we need to kick migrants out, and then you see parts of the country where there's hardly any migrants. So you're like, okay, you're not actually responding to an actual problem. This is just what you hear repeated through the news, through the media. Okay. Just a few thoughts about where we stand now here in the Maré. I think there is a wonderful metaphor about this neighborhood, and even about this particular space where we are, this museum. And what we found out in this brilliant and informative museum is that this proud and amazing neighborhood has been one of the most has one of the most poetically moving names I've come across in a very long time, the Maré, the tide. And I can't think of a much better word to signal this longing for mobility, a way to reflect, to capture and to reflect the dream of movement, this slow retrogression of the water, constantly swinging between highs and lows, sort of represents. The people that came here, initially, they made land out of water. They chose against the highs of the favelas in the surrounding mountains, and they preferred the water with its own highs and its lows. And in my mind, I think this is an excellent metaphor for this faith that you can place into time, this faith that things can and will eventually turn around, but the lows will turn high at some point. We don't know when, but at some point it will happen. Okay, so I'll go beyond these slightly strange and obscure reflections on the history of this place, because I want to talk a little bit about the present moment. If a favela before historically was built on waiting, this waiting has long given its place to a realization of permanence, right? In other words, this centrifugal force, the desire to live, has given way to settlement. The community is strong and that's here to stay, and it has been so for a very long time. It's bold and it's proud. It's determined to claim this space for its own permanently. This is, in my mind, again, very similar to what happens to an individual migrant at the moment when they realize that they will never go back to where they started their journey from, or that they will never end where their journey intended to end. I think there is also a moment for a community to also realize that it's not as temporary as they had imagined itself to be. This is a transformative moment, a threshold of sorts, after which the persons and the community's mentalities alike, they do change. Even though, of course, they continue to hold fragments of their identity from the past. Here in the Maré, the community has brought with it the tide of another place, that of the Brazilian Northeast, and the pride of existing and coping and striving against the difficulties. I think this has brought about a sense of place that the plains of the Southern Zone are no longer able to even dream of, as they are swamped. They're taken over by the millions of temporary beachgoers, tourists, but also the middle classes that are blinded by the affluence of centuries of amassing capital. I was told from my very first day here in Rio that, for example, Leblon is comparable to its riches to the affluent metropolises far away in the northern hemisphere, in cities like New York and London. But here in the near north, as maybe one can call it, Rio's northern zone, this place has held on to a sense of its own place, and this living testament is this museum. Not just for the place's existence, but only here in the Maré can a museum feel so alive, can it feel part of the community. Does it work? Okay. Nice. So only here in a place like the Maré could the museum feel so alive and such a strong part of the community. It's literally organic. Okay. So the question now, and I think I want to conclude with this question, is for these wonderfully and organically developed informal spaces of the urban peripheries. How can we possibly improve life as it is at the moment? So to go beyond just existing, to go beyond just surviving, right? And to claim a right to something better. There is another strange, even if beautiful sounding expression that academics have used in describing how people can make a claim to another type of life in the city. They call it the right to the city, right? But just like that, as on its own, as an abstract and all-encompassing term, I think it's still void of meaning and it's useless, even if it sounds beautiful. What we had in mind when we started NutriCities was to try and understand what the right to the city could mean in terms of one specific aspect of our daily lives. And of course, this is food. It is not difficult to imagine that this is one of the most important aspects, because it's one of the aspects, one of the things that we can literally not live without. We die without food. And yet we completely take it for granted, both the quality and the quantity of what we eat, of where it comes from, and at what cost. And I think we fail to realize that in the tiniest moments of panic, we realize to see then how fragile the food network, the food chain is in the big cities where we all live is. Those of us who were in Athens in the hours and in the days after the peak of the financial crisis, where there were capital controls imposed in the city, I think we might still remember the image where in a few hours all of the food disappeared from supermarkets. It was completely gone. And this was even not, it wasn't an actual crisis, nothing had actually, there wasn't a war that started, there wasn't the borders hadn't closed. Again, it was a media-driven panic, this idea that the end was near, and it just took a few hours for what you take for granted, that you are in a city like this, and if you're hungry and you have a small amount of money, you can get something to eat. There is going to be food for you always available. This realization completely disappeared in a few hours, and of course this is something that Raz knows much better than I do, and there is some crazy statistics about the big cities and how fragile they are in this sense. I remember reading somewhere that I think New York City, for example, has something like 3 days of supplies. So if New York City was to cut off by the rest of the world, in 3 days people would go hungry. So there would no longer be a question of, whether you're the super rich who eats in the best restaurants in Manhattan, or if you're striving, you would be equally fucked, basically, within 72 hours. So I think this is why it's so important for us to make this exercise, to understand what it is that we eat in the city, what the foods that we currently have access to, what do they do with us, to us, what our location within the city determines in terms of what we can have access to, and at what price. Not just the price of money, but also the social and the environmental price, of course. And then, as this research has been actually led by the wonderful CPI collective. Okay. And then this research of the past 16 months, led by the wonderful Minhocas Urbanas, the CPI collective here, we want to explore further what new ways there are to grow our own food right here in the city, to strengthen the current agroecological networks in the peripheries of the urban peripheries. In short, to make more viable the path towards food sovereignty, towards claiming back control over the substance that gives us life, food. So not just any right to the city, but a right to food in the city and a right to life in the city. Thank you.
Tá.
português.
Ok. No, mas I can ask in English.
Okay.
If I don't get to produce a good question, she helps me.
Okay.
Well, I didn't use the translator, but so I'd like to understand better the connection between what you said about the favela as a territory and the necessity to produce locally, for not to be starving, because I understood that every city, even New York, will be starving in 3 days if something happens. And so I would like to understand better this connection, because I agree that it's necessary to produce locally. We had this problem this year, a few months ago, because we had a strike, a truck. So the city had no food in a certain time. So I'd like you to develop this.
Repete a pergunta pra gente aí agora.
Ela não traduziu?
Ela falou
Então
Shall I repeat the question?
I'm going to say it in Portuguese because she didn't.
I think if I repeat, maybe.
Eu perguntei para ele. Eu não
Não, traduziu não.
Não, mas eu vou falar sobre conversão. Então, vou falar em português. Que eu não consegui entender muito bem a conexão entre o que ele falou da
I'll repeat. Okay.